Hello everyone, you just had the functional part of the explanation about the returns. It's time for the technical explanation. So for those of you who wouldn't know me yet, I'm Olivier. I'm the guy in charge of the development team which made the returns. And so I'm here to really give you a technical overview of how it works behind the scenes. And so if you need to customize it yourself, work with it, well, you will know where to start. So first of all, for the ones who maybe weren't following at the bottom of the room, this is the screen with the returns. Okay, so this is the thing we're talking about. So you have this full list of elements that you need to take action on in your accounting. And when you click on one of them, you will end up on that view here, where you will have, well, of course, a bunch of information about your return, buttons to interact with it, and a few checks here that we will go back to that will just ensure consistency of your accounting and prevent you doing mistakes when working with the return. So let's start by the basic block. What object do we use for returns? We use a new model called account return. So you can see an account return as an element of a to-do list for your accounting. So basically, each account return has a deadline, like you would expect for any element of a to-do list. Each account return has a succession of states that it needs to go through to reach completion. And this is, of course, what we are aiming for, completion of the elements we have to achieve. So how do we control the returns? How do we configure those things? Well, returns are basically piloted by another object called account return type. So the return types are responsible of configuring how your returns will be created, what they will be able to do, and essentially how they will work. So let's go through a bunch of very important fields and key things to understand how they work. You can link a report on the return. So report ID, it's a many-to-one to an account report object. When do you do that? Typically for your tax return submission, you will link the return type to the tax report you need to submit. This way, Odoo knows that it needs to attach, when you lock the return, a PDF of that return in the chatter of that report in the chatter of the return, and so you keep an archived version of it. Same thing, it will know that it needs to generate an export file for that return. Deadline periodicity, it's basically how often you want those returns to occur. So if you're submitting your VAT monthly, this will say, I want it monthly. If it's by quarter, this will say it's by quarter. By the way, there is still a field on the company controlling that, like in previous versions. So this is just a means to override the value that is configured on the company. So with this, you can say, okay, normally my company submits returns monthly, but this one is special. It's only something that I need to do yearly. It's a closing operation, whatever. So for this one, I will say it's yearly. Deadline start date, it's for a niche case that happens in some countries, so it's something legal. It's when your period for your return does not start on the first day of the month. So we have that in the UK, if I'm not mistaken. We start a period on the 7th of the month and it ends on the 6th of the next month. So this is the field you configure that with. You set a date there, and this will be the start date for your first period, and it will be used for the computation of the next ones. Deadline days delay, it's to set up your deadline. So it's the number of days before, after the end of the period where to set your deadline. So it's just to say, okay, I want Odoo to tell me this is due for that day. Auto-generate now, it's interesting because that's where the magic occurs. You have seen the screen with the returns, you have seen the talk Laura gave just before. Essentially, the returns seem like they are magically there when you arrive in the accounting. Well, actually, they need to be created at some point. They'll just record in a table, right? This is done by a cron. So this cron runs every day. It will check all the return types that are auto-generate, and it will generate the returns for them if they are needed, depending on the setup of the periodicity for those returns. And it will also use, the cron will also use country ID, which is the last field we have here. The country ID is basically telling you, okay, this return type is for companies in that country. So of course you don't want to generate, if you're in multi-company and multiple countries, you don't want to generate a closing for the Belgian VAT on French companies, right? Unless they have a VAT number in Belgium, in which case this will work as well, of course. So now you might say, this is simple. This is too simple. This will not work for more advanced cases. And you would actually be right. If we just have that, it will not work for everything. That's why it's normal in the framework we did. We intended this way. to make Python overrides for more specific things. So it's the typical Odoo override you would have like in any module to change any kind of standard feature. It's just you have to know which function to call, right? So here it's generate all returns. If you want examples of that, we do that in the standard code in two very noticeable places. It's for the EC sales list and intrastat reports in Europe. So basically, those reports in the EU, they need to be submitted only if you made a certain kind of operations with other EU countries within the period. So of course, you don't want to always generate those returns. You don't want them to appear for every customer that would every time need to say, yeah, but actually I'm not submitting that report because I didn't do this kind of operation, right? So that's why we made a Python override, and that's why this override is checking that it is interesting to generate this report. So essentially, we will just check, okay, what kind of operations do we have in this period? Then I need to generate the EC sales list. That's it. So we expect you, if you need more advanced things, more, I would say, specific reports with advanced conditions on when they need to be submitted, to do an override here, it's perfectly fine. Now, something else you might say is, fine, but I watched very closely Laura's talk, and she was talking about 3 states on the return. How can that work with my workflow? Because in my country, it's very specific, and we have that web service we need to connect to. We have many steps, actually, that the government needs to confirm, and we need to go through. How can this work with only 3 states? Well, for cases like that, it is possible to tweak the states of the returns. So you have a bunch of examples here. 2 of them in India, where we have a flow like that, where they need to connect to a web service to submit the report or even fetch information for the government that they need to then inject in their accounting before reporting. So it is possible to do that and to have per return type a different flow of states. We do support that. How does it work? How do you do that? Well, here is how you define a flow of states for the returns. You can see it's basic Odoo, it's just a selection field that we put on the return. So each flow of states that we will want to support will correspond to a selection field, a distinct selection field. So if you're following me, that means every return is getting a new selection field for each of the possible flows, even though it will only use one of them at a time. So you might say, but what is this design? We will just have useless columns in the database. Well, yes, but at the same time, the model is much more simple. So I remind you that it is very unlikely that you will end up with dozens of thousands of returns in this table. So it's perfectly fine to have this, because for the sake of simplicity, it makes everything better. So this is the field we use for the generic states of all the tax reports. So by default, this is what we are using for all the tax reports. To give you another example with less states, here's one that has only one, actually. So there is like the new states, so nothing is done, and there is paid, everything is over. So we need to define selection fields. Fine, it's easy, fine. But how do we tell Odoo that those selection fields correspond to the declaration of a flow for the returns? Well, there is an additional thing. There is an additional field, selection field on the return type this time, and this field is basically taking the name of the selection fields that are flows for the returns. So states workflow on the return, you set it to the name of the field that you want to use on the returns to get the state. So of course, if you're adding your own flow of states on the returns, you want to override that field and add a selection value so that your new field is supported by it. You can see that it is a computed field, it's a computed editable field. So if you want it to receive a default value under certain conditions, you can also override the compute, of course. That's why we made it computed, actually, because we wanted to have this flexibility for the standard returns, but you're not forced to do that. Just adding the selection value is fine, and you can just set it in data or by hand in the user interface. Of course, it works as well. That being said, we move on to the next element, the checks. So I showed you this screen, and I told you that those things at the bottom of the screen were checks. So those lines are, well, validations that are ran on your database, on your accounting data. How do they work, essentially? So each of them is an instance of account return check. So that's another new model, of course. And this model basically contains the result of a check operation that was ran on your database that could be automatic or manual. So automatic, Odoo made it for you. We did the computation and we set the result in the check. Manual, we asked for the user, hey, please confirm that thing, and the user just has to click, yeah, it's all right. After, of course, doing the verification. Checks can be linked to an action, so when you click on the check, you can see the records, for example, that are failing the check. So here, if I take the ones that I have here for the VAT report, I have bill attachments. This one is just checking that all the bills in my period have an attachment on them, because it's of course a legal requirement that you need to keep some justificative documents for everything that you put into your accounting. This check, if it fails, if I click on it, I will see all the list of bills that don't have an attachment so that I can take action on them. And of course I can bypass it if I have another means of saving my bills than just putting the attachment in Odoo. That's of course working. We don't want to block users with those features. So you might be wondering as well when the checks are refreshed exactly. So Laura showed you just before that when you change things and came back on the returns, some checks could be validated or failing depending on the things you fixed or introduced into your accounting, right? This is done when you access the view. So the refresh of the checks always happens when you access the view. We do that asynchronously so that we don't ruin the performance or make people wait without reasons, I would say, but we always refresh them when you access the view. So keep that in mind if you have to configure them or to customize them. You can, of course, tweak the checks. Again, we want the return framework to be as simple, technically speaking, as possible, and we don't want to put models everywhere with various conditions, foreign keys everywhere, and things that make it super complete but super impossible to configure because the complexity is just too high. So the checks, most of them are just directly defined in Python. So with just an override, again, of the run checks function. Of course, you are free to do your own overrides. That's the reason it's designed that way. However, there is still an easy way to do easy checks because we want the flexibility for users to be able to create those from the interface themselves if they need them. So if you need an additional little something for your tax closing, let's say, you are able to do that from the UI with this object called account return check template. So of course you can also create them in data, no problem with that. So you have an example of the form view here of one of those checks. Basically, it's very simple. You define a model, a domain on that model, and so anything matching this domain will be considered as causing a failure of the test. And of course, when you click to see what is behind this check, well, you will see the failing records and you will be able again to take action and fix it the usual way. Now, I want to take the few minutes I have left to address a few technical concerns and pinpoint a few interesting things on multi-company. So, you know, there are cases, considering tax closing, there are cases in which you have multiple companies which you want to aggregate the data from into the same submission of the VAT report. So typically, you have branches, so subsidiaries, they all share the same VAT number. Let's take the simple case. From the VAT point of view, it's a single entity, so you want to declare all of them in one go. Same thing with the tax units, so if it's legal in your country, it is in Belgium, you can have different companies that will, from the government's point of view, work again as a single entity for VAT. We have been supporting that for a while, of course we still do, but let's just remember how it worked in Odoo 18 and previous versions. Basically, you had nothing helping you in what you needed to do, what were the operations to do. You just had this next activity on the closing entry that was in draft, and hopefully you do it well. Hopefully you remember that all those companies work together. It was a bit error prone. We had to introduce a bunch of constraints because of that, because people did not understand it quite well, and frankly, they were right. It was complicated for nothing. What we do now is that in cases like that where you have multiple companies that need to aggregate their data in a common submission, there is one return object that is generated for all those companies. So it is shared across the companies. So I want to emphasize for developers among you that we so have two fields on the same model that are referencing companies, and they don't have the same meaning, of course. So on account return, you have company ID. It's the main company doing the submission. So typically the parent of your branch hierarchy. And you have company IDs, which are all the companies that are concerned by this return. So all your subsidiaries, including the parent. Now, can you tweak further than everything that I explained? Yes, you can. However, beware of Python overrides. I told you the framework is made to be simple. So that means even us, even ourselves in the standard code, we have, as I explained with the EC sales list, sometimes to do Python overrides to just bypass the normal flow because, legal reasons. You have to support that. So if you want to tweak from the interface standard data, please keep in mind that maybe those standard data define a bunch of overrides, and maybe the things you're tweaking from the UI will not work exactly well because of that. So you just have to keep that in mind, test it on a demo database. If it seems to work fine, no problem. There is nothing hidden, okay? If it is overridden, it will really not work. It's not something that will be, oh, sometimes yes, sometimes no. However, of course, everything that we would define yourself will work fine, huh? So customizing from the UI is perfectly okay. And of course, again, feel free to do your own Python overrides. The framework is made for that. Just to give you an example, again, as I told you, is the typical Odoo thing. You just use the XML ID of the return types. So like in the example here, it's from the Belgian localization. It's just to say, okay, the payment wizard, I want to replace it by the payment wizard for my Belgian localization, so with the instructions to pay in Belgium. And so I just run my condition, do whatever thing I want to do there, and that's it. Don't forget the super call, of course. I would just give an additional advice. Keep things simple. Because actually, I have an anecdote about that. When we were working on version 19, we had to implement the connection to a web service in a localization. And the guy who was in charge of that, so did the job, and then came to us and was like, it's nice, huh, your returns framework, but it's not very well suited for web services. And we were like, what does that even mean? Web not suited for web services, it's just overrides, right? And we had a look at what he had done in his PR. And actually, yeah, he made it too complicated, actually. So to support the web service, he had added a bunch of fields on every return. He had changed the view of every return in his country to make appear more information. And then what if I have this kind of error? What if I have this kind of other error? Then I want to put a flag there, a flag there. It's too complex. So we simplified it and made it much, much better. And it worked fine. It proved to be easy to implement when doing it like that. So again, remember to fall back as much as possible on standard. Remember to, as much as possible, simplify the workflows. Use additional states, not too many of them. Don't add fields everywhere if it's not absolutely mandatory and required for the feature to work. That would be really my advice on how to use that. And remember that the closest you are from the feature as it was designed, and so the standard, the most basic thing, the closest you are so from other localizations, other returns, and so the easiest it is to understand for the user, of course. And this is a little bonus slide for the end. We've been talking a lot about the returns, the tax returns, all that today, but actually this model, the exact same objects, are used for another feature. So I think Winan showed that this morning in the keynote. There was a talk about that yesterday by Laura as well. So we introduced in 19 the audit working files. They use account return as well as their model. So the checks, check templates, all that, it works just the same. You just have a bunch of additional views around those models, but otherwise it's just all the same. So you came here from one thing and you got information on how to customize two. Isn't that beautiful? So that being said, thank you for listening to me. Thank you for being at Odoo Experience. And it's now time for the Q&A. You can scan the QR code and you have a link to the pad. Thank you. Hello.
Well, it seems like something that's very customizable and that we can do a lot of stuff with that.
Yep.
So first question is very practical. Can we get the slides?
getting the slides.
Yes.
Well, the video is on YouTube anyway. I guess the slides are in the video, so sure. I can give the link to my Google Drive for you to download the slides directly if you want. We can post it in the chat. Why not? So yes.
Nice. Well, someone said great work. So
thank you.
Well, questions are coming in, but I have a question myself. What do you see in the future? Will you keep on doing more stuff?
Ahaha, you asked me to spoil my talk from this afternoon, but I will do it. We will use that more and more. The returns to me are really like, I think it's one of the most significant features we introduced over the last years, because we are only starting to see the impact of that thing with what we did this year. So we will integrate them more for more web services, more submissions of different reports, maybe sometimes optional things that you wouldn't be able to enable or not. I think this is just the beginning, and the feature will probably evolve to a second, third versions over time now. But we will use them more and more. And the impact on the flows of the report is huge, because now the reports are no more the center of everything you're doing. It's the return that is piloting the flow, not the report itself. So yeah, it's a big thing.
Okay. Can we create other workflows like end of month booking to be sure accountants follow all steps needed to perform a specific task?
Yes. So with custom code, you can do whatever you want first. So of course you can do it, yes. You can also create them directly from the UI. That's something I didn't really say, true, oops. But you can create new return types from the user interface directly. So if it's something really specific to a customer, and even that customer wants to do that themselves, they can. Oopsie. and technical problems. And yeah, they're totally free to create them by hand, configure them from the UI, and it will just work the same. And they can just add check templates then to do the additional verifications they want, and have like warnings preventing moving on before checking some operations. So typically for closings and this kind of operations, yeah.
I think that the talk from just before from Laura can help with that as well.
Yep.
If the customization are made by us, then the localization will be available. Will there be errors in codes? I'm not sure I understand
exactly?
the question entirely.
I'm not entirely sure to understand either, but just to be clear, of course, everything that is done in the localization is in the standard code. So of course, we do the support for it. So of course, if there is anything wrong, we fix it. If you want to contribute with something for your country and you want to implement it so that it gets merged later in standard, feel free to do so. We will review your code, we will eventually merge it, and yes, then we will support it. So up to you to decide what is something you want to do on your side and keep on maintaining yourself, or you want to merge into Odoo. Like every other localization feature, actually. There's nothing new here.
Great, and there is a somewhat related question. How do you ensure updates to keep up with regulatory changes?
We pay a lot of attention to them. And we count on the community to tell us if there is something missing. That's actually also your role in that thing. So, of course, we want everything to be as perfect as possible. But let's be honest, it's impossible if we don't get the information in time. So we are counting on you to raise awareness if there is something that becomes mandatory on your country, or that would break with the legal change that the government is doing. If you have worries about anything, really, don't hesitate to contact us about that, and we will have a look.
Well, that is it. I don't have any more questions. So, congrats.
Thank you. Thank you.